The first bullet wasn't fired, but the insult was. "Hands where I can see them, boy," the white officer barked, as if spitting poison with each word. Director Elijah Keynes, that Kane, the man who had dismantled 3 domestic terror cells in the last 5 years, was standing in the middle of Jefferson Street, unarmed, his government-issued SUV idling behind him. He was wearing the same tailored charcoal suit he'd worn during a classified meeting just 30 minutes earlier, yet somehow, to these cops, he was just another black man in the wrong place. The problem? Jefferson Street wasn't the wrong place. The wrong place was inside their heads. Kane raised his hand slowly, his eyes never leaving the lead officer's face. "I'm going to reach for my ID. I'm a federal agent. Don't you move." Another officer cut in, voice shrill, finger tightening on the trigger. The beam of his flashlight slashed across Kane's chest like a blade. Behind the cops, a small crowd had started to gather, their phone cameras up, recording. The air was thick with the electric taste of storm and outrage. Kane knew better than to argue, but years of facing down armed criminals had sharpened his voice into something calm and deadly precise. "You're making a mistake," he said. The lead cop, badge reading C. Rollins, smirked. "The only mistake is thinking you can run around here like you own the place." It wasn't about law. It wasn't about procedure. It was about the color of his skin, and Kane could see it in every sneer, every twitch of their trigger fingers. From the corner of his eye, he spotted Movement Special Agent Maya Torres, his second in command, sprinting toward them from the SUV's passenger side, FBI credentials in hand. "He's the director of the FBI," she shouted, voice breaking through the rain. They didn't lower their weapons. Not an inch. It had started 2 hours earlier, with a single piece of intel. A white nationalist militia was planning a coordinated attack on the city's federal buildings. Kane had insisted on leading the reconnaissance himself, knowing the danger. He'd expected hostility from the militia. He hadn't expected to be hunted by the very people sworn to protect the law. And now, here he was, in the middle of the street, with 4 assault rifles aimed at him and a growing crowd that smelled blood in the water. The first time Kane had a gun pointed at him, he was 14. Back then, it was a convenience store clerk who thought he saw a weapon in Kane's hands. There hadn't been one. That memory was the reason he joined law enforcement to change the system from the inside. But as Rollins stepped closer, boots splashing in the puddles, Kane knew the system was still rotting. "Director," Maya said urgently, her voice trembling, "let me show them." "Shut your mouth, lady, before you're next," Rollins snapped, swinging his rifle toward her. The crowd gasped. Kane's jaw clenched. He could feel the moment stretching like a tightrope about to snap. "Rollins," Kane said evenly, "you're pointing that gun at the wrong people. The real threat is—" He didn't finish. A deafening clap of thunder masked the sound of footsteps rushing up behind them. Under the rain-slick streetlights, chaos was brewing, though the officers holding the rifles didn't know it yet. From the shadow of an alley across the street, a figure emerged broad-shouldered, masked, carrying something long and metallic. Kane recognized it instantly. An AR-15 with a drum magazine. This wasn't a random pedestrian. This was the threat they had been chasing all night. Kane's instincts kicked in. "Behind you," he barked. His voice cut through the storm like a siren. But Rollins only sneered. "Nice try, boy. That one's not going to work on me." Maya's voice was sharper, desperate. "I'm not joking. He's got it too late." The masked man raised the rifle, aimed not at Kane, but at the cluster of officers, and opened fire. Muzzle flashes lit the rain like fireworks, the sound deafening in the tight street. 2 cops dropped instantly, one screaming as a bullet tore through his leg. Rollins spun, returning fire wildly, his arrogance dissolving into raw panic. The smell of gunpowder burned the air. Kane dove sideways, grabbing Maya and pulling her behind the SUV. "Stay low," he shouted. Bullets pinged off the metal frame. Glass shattered, spraying them with shards. Somewhere in the chaos, the crowd screamed, scattering like startled birds. Phone cameras still recorded, even as people ran for their lives. Kane's Glock was holstered under his jacket. He drew it in a single motion, leaning out from cover just long enough to squeeze off 2 shots. The masked man stumbled back, hit in the shoulder, but didn't fall. Instead, he pivoted and vanished into the alley. For a heartbeat, the only sounds were the rain and the groans of the injured. Then, Rollins' voice raw, furious, cut through. He rounded the SUV, gun still up, aiming at Kane again. You set this up? You brought him here. Kane stared at him, disbelief sharp in his chest. You think I'd stage an ambush on myself? Rollins' eyes were bloodshot, his breath ragged. You people always playing the victim. You almost got your men killed because you were too busy profiling me instead of watching your damn perimeter. Kane's voice rose, cold and cutting. One of the surviving officers, a younger man named Bennett, stumbled over, clutching his bleeding arm. Rollins. He's right. I saw the guy. He wasn't with them. Rollins didn't lower his rifle. Maya stepped forward, fury blazing in her dark eyes. Enough. You're threatening the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Every second you keep that gun on him, your career and your freedom are circling the drain. Her words had weight now. The surviving crowd members, still filming, had captured the entire exchange from the moment Rollins first drew on Kane. The internet was going to devour this before sunrise. Somewhere down the block, sirens wailed backup was on the way. Kane knew the arriving units could either make this better, or so much worse. He lowered his own weapon deliberately, showing empty hands. Rollins, he said, voice even, stand down. This is your last chance to walk away without handcuffs. Rollins' jaw worked, torn between rage and fear. Then movement at the edge of the scene. The masked shooter was back, stepping out from another alley, rifle raised again. This time, Kane didn't wait. He fired. 3 clean shots. The man collapsed, rifle clattering into the waterlogged street. Silence. When the backup units arrived, it took less than 5 minutes for the narrative to fracture. Rollins claimed Kane had interfered with an ongoing investigation, refused to follow commands, and created confusion that allowed the suspect to escape. Never mind that Kane had been the one to neutralize the threat. Maya fought like hell to shut the story down, producing her own badge and demanding immediate communication with the FBI's Internal Affairs Division. But Rollins' allies in the precinct weren't interested in listening. Kane stood by the body of the shooter, rain dripping from his brow. The man's mask had been pulled back during the fall. He was exactly who Kane expected, an active member of the Liberty Vipers, a militia the FBI had been tracking for months. Kane had been on his trail tonight to prevent a mass casualty event. The tragedy? If Rollins had done his job, 3 more militia members might have been taken alive. Instead, they were out there, moving, adapting. An hour later, Kane sat in the back of a police cruiser not as a suspect, but because it was the only dry place where Maya could debrief him without prying ears. His wet suit clung to his frame, his hands steady despite the adrenaline still burning through him. You know they're going to bury this, Maya said. Kane's lips thinned. Not if I get to it first. She frowned. You're talking about going public? I'm talking about making sure the truth lands where it can't be erased. Congress, media, civil rights groups. If the system wants to eat its own rot, let's feed it the truth until it chokes. Maya studied him for a moment, then nodded. I'm in. By sunrise, the first videos were already viral. The footage showed Rollins and his men aiming at Kane, refusing to lower their weapons even after being told he was the FBI director. Then the gunfire. Then the way Rollins turned back on Kane like nothing had changed. The comments were brutal. Hashtags erupted. News anchors called it one of the most egregious cases of racial bias caught on camera. But inside the precinct, the atmosphere was a different storm. Rollins' superiors wanted him suspended quietly to let the noise die down. Rollins refused. He went on local radio instead, framing himself as a victim of a politically motivated smear campaign. That was his second mistake, because Kane had everything. The malicious files, audio recordings from the suspect's phone, and a direct link showing that Rollins had ignored a bolo alert for the same masked man earlier in the night. The fall would come fast, but Kane didn't want just one man to fall. He wanted the whole structure that allowed Rollins to act with impunity to crack open in daylight. And that's when he decided the next move would be his, and it would be public, unflinching, and impossible to spin. The first press conference was supposed to be small, just Kane, standing in front of the Hoover building with Maya at his side, addressing an incident during the course of a federal investigation. But by the time the cameras were rolling, the crowd was massive. Not just journalists, but activists, legal observers, and regular citizens who'd watched the video 100 times on their phones. Kane didn't smile. He didn't soften his voice. He looked directly into the nearest lens and began. On the night of August 10th, a domestic terror suspect opened fire in the streets of our city. I was there. I neutralized the threat. I am alive because of my training and my team. But what happened before the shots were fired is just as dangerous to our democracy. Maya handed him a single sheet notes, in case he needed them. He didn't. I was stopped, surrounded, and held at gunpoint by officers of the Jefferson City Police Department. Not because I matched the description of a suspect. Not because there was probable cause. But because I was a black man standing in the street at night. Even after my identity was made clear, the weapons stayed up. The command stayed hostile. And while those rifles were aimed at me, the real shooter had a clear path. A ripple went through the crowd. The journalists scribbled furiously. Kane's gaze swept across the sea of microphones. This is not about me. I have resources, a platform, and a badge that can force accountability. But for every person like me, there are thousands whose stories never make the news. Who are buried under false charges, who are silenced in holding cells, who never make it home at all. Maya leaned forward and whispered, "They're watching from inside the precinct." Good. Kane continued, "I am calling for a federal investigation into the Jefferson City Police Department. Effective immediately, the FBI is freezing joint task force operations with them until cooperation and compliance with civil rights protections are proven." The crowd erupted, some cheering, some gasping. Kane stepped back from the podium. He didn't take questions. He had no intention of letting anyone else twist his words. Inside the Jefferson City PD headquarters, Rollins watched the press conference from a break room TV, his knuckles white around a coffee cup. Every sentence from Kane was another nail in his coffin. But Rollins wasn't the type to admit defeat. "He's lying," he muttered, "setting me up to cover his own screw-up." Bennett, the younger officer who had survived the shootout, shifted uncomfortably. "Sarge, the whole thing's on video." Rollins turned, eyes cold. "You think you're in the clear, kid? You think Kane's gonna stop with me? They'll be looking at everyone who was there. And you." He jabbed a finger at Bennett's chest. "You didn't exactly follow procedure either." Bennett's mouth opened, then shut. Fear crept in. That was how Rollins kept control, spread the guilt, keep everyone scared. But fear works both ways. 2 nights later, Kane got an encrypted file drop from an anonymous source. Inside, bodycam footage from one of the Jefferson City officers who'd been on the scene. The footage started 10 minutes before Kane arrived. It showed Rollins and his men laughing about hunting season and scaring some suits tonight. It showed them ignoring a dispatch alert about the masked suspect's location less than 2 blocks away because, as Rollins put it, he's probably long gone. And worst of all, it showed Rollins saying, "If we find him," meaning Kane, "let's make him sweat a little. Remind him whose streets these are." Maya watched the footage with her jaw clenched. "This ends him." "No," Kane said, a steel edge in his voice. "This ends all of them." Kane's next move was surgical. He didn't leak the footage to the press, not yet. Instead, he sent it to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division and to 3 members of Congress known for grilling police leadership in public hearings. He knew once it hit that level, it wouldn't be contained to backroom deals. The strategy worked. Within 48 hours, Rollins and 2 other officers were suspended without pay pending investigation. The mayor, under intense political pressure, announced an independent review of the entire department. But Kane wasn't finished. He wanted the truth in the court of public opinion and in a court of law. The night before the city council's emergency meeting, Rollins made his fatal mistake. He decided to confront Kane. It was just past midnight when Kane left the Hoover building. The streets were quiet, the rain from earlier leaving a silver sheen on the pavement. As he approached his car, he heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. "Director Kane," a voice called. Kane turned, hand instinctively brushing the edge of his holster. Rollins stood under a flickering street lamp, plain clothes, but with the same predator's glare. "You think you can destroy me?" Rollins said, stepping closer. "You don't know how this city works. I've got people, real people who aren't scared of your badge." Kane's voice was calm, almost too calm. "The ones who are scared are the ones who should be. And if you're here to threaten me, you're already finished." Rollins smirked. "Threat? No. This is a promise. You don't back off. Next time I see you, you won't be holding a press conference." Kane took one deliberate step forward. "If you're thinking about doing something stupid, remember Simeon's always watching." Rollins didn't see the unmarked surveillance van parked half a block away. He didn't see the 2 DOJ agents inside. audio and video recording every word. That was the moment Kane had been waiting for. The following morning, the recordings were in federal hands. By noon, Rollins was in cuffs charged with obstruction of justice, official misconduct, and making violent threats against a federal officer. The footage of his midnight confrontation played on every major news network. The city council voted unanimously to request federal oversight of the Jefferson City Police Department. It wasn't just Rollins anymore. Half a dozen officers were facing review for prior misconduct cases. For Kane, the victory wasn't about ego. It was about turning a moment of personal humiliation into systemic change. But he also knew racism didn't end with one arrest, and the fight was far from over. That night, he stood in his office, staring out at the city lights. Maya stepped in quietly. "You did it," she said. Kane shook his head. "We started it. Now we see if the city's ready to finish it." Somewhere out there, people were still watching the video, still talking about it. And maybe, just maybe, that meant the next time a black man in a suit stood in the middle of the street, the guns would stay down. But Kane had been in this game too long to believe in maybe without a fight. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of headlines, hearings, and backroom deals. For Jefferson City, it was the first time in decades that the police department had been stripped of its aura of untouchable authority. For Kane, it was an exhausting reminder that justice was never a single victory, it was a campaign. The Civil Rights Division's investigation uncovered years of misconduct, falsified reports, excessive use of force, selective enforcement targeting minority neighborhoods. Federal monitors were assigned to oversee reforms. Lawsuits piled up. And then came the warning. Maya slid the dossier across Kane's desk. "The Liberty Vipers are calling you enemy number one. They've been recruiting hard since the shooting. This," she tapped a blurry surveillance photo, "is their new leader. Matthew Rourke, former Marine, has a grudge against the FBI for shutting down his weapons trafficking." Kane recognized the type immediately. Dangerous, patient, the kind who wouldn't make the mistake of charging down a street with guns blazing. "They're going to come at you sideways," Maya said. "Not head-on." She was right. The first strike was digital. A deepfake video circulated online, purporting to show Kane accepting bribes from a city contractor. It was laughably fake to anyone who looked closely, but the damage was in the share, not the truth. The second strike was personal. A threatening letter left on Kane's doorstep, listing the names of his nieces and nephews. The third was meant to be final. It happened on a Friday evening. Kane was leaving a downtown community forum on police reform, shaking hands with residents, when the lights in the parking lot flickered. In the sudden dim, two men in tactical vests moved in fast. One grabbed Maya. The other drew a suppressed pistol and aimed for Kane's chest. The shot never landed. From the shadows, a single crack rang out. The man with the pistol jerked, stumbled, and dropped. The other spun, but a second shot put him down. Kane turned toward the source and froze. It was Bennett, the young officer from Jefferson City PD. He stepped forward, rifle still up, hands steady despite the adrenaline in his eyes. "I owed you," Bennett said simply, "and I wasn't going to watch them do it again." The attackers were confirmed Liberty Vipers. Their phones told a bigger story: plans for multiple assassinations, including public officials and journalists. One name stood out: C. Rollins. Kane was in the operations room when the news came in. Rollins, released on bail while awaiting trial, had been found in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. The scene was grim. Bullet holes riddled the walls. 3 bodies lay inside. 2 were Vipers. One was Rollins. The official report said crossfire during a dispute over payment. The street whispered a different story: that the Vipers had decided Rollins was a liability, a man whose arrogance drew heat they didn't need. It was an ending Kane hadn't planned, but one that felt inevitable. Hate was a fire that consumed even its own. 2 days later, Kane stood at Rollins' graveside. There were no mourners, just a few uniformed officers there out of obligation. The air smelled of cut grass and rain. Maya stood beside him. "Why come?" Kane kept his eyes on the headstone. "Because I need to remember how this started. If I ever forget, I might start thinking the job's about winning instead of preventing the next one of these." They left without saying more. The media frenzy faded, as it always did. The federal monitors stayed. The Jefferson City PD began mandatory bias training and installed civilian oversight boards. None of it was perfect, but it was movement. And movement was how change began. Months later, Kane was invited back to Jefferson City not for an investigation, but to speak at a new cadet graduation. He stood on the same steps where Rollins had once smirked at him under the flashing lights. He looked out over the fresh uniforms, the nervous young faces, and told them the truth. "You will make mistakes," he said. "The difference between being a good officer and a dangerous one is whether you can admit them and whether you learn. Power is not the badge. Power is the trust the public gives you. Break that, and you break the very thing you swore to protect." The applause was quiet, but steady. Some cadets would remember his words. Some wouldn't, but the seed was planted. That night, Kane walked alone through the city streets. The same wet asphalt, the same echoes of sirens in the distance. But there was no gun pointed at his chest. No officer calling him boy. He knew it could happen again, in another place, another night. But for now, the street was his. And that was worth fighting for. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.